My name is Emily Chamlee-Wright, and I'm the president of the Institute for Humane Studies. For 60 years, IHS has supported scholars working within the classical liberal intellectual tradition. That's 6 decades of ensuring that the ideas of a free and open society are regularly taught and discussed and challenged and developed at colleges and universities across the country. Now, today, I am delighted to be here with my good friend, Brian Hooks. He is, I am proud to say, an IHS alum. He is also the president of the Charles Koch Foundation and chairman and CEO of Stand Together, a community of philanthropists, business leaders, and social entrepreneurs committed to empowering people to realize their unique potential, which gets us to the topic for today, which is Brian's new book, Believe in People, Bottom-Up Solutions for a Top-Down World. Brian is co-author of this book with Charles Koch, who served as IHS's board chair for many, many years. Now, Brian, you and I go way back to the early 2000s, and we really started to work together in earnest in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Mercatus sponsored a major research study, and I was privileged to be a part of it. And this was when you were COO of the Mercatus Center. And it's really the reason why I'm so excited about the Believe in People project and the book, because you're someone who has always seen the connection between the ideas that scholars in the classical liberal tradition explore and the role that those ideas have in supporting widespread human flourishing. So I'm going to begin with the question that usually begins book talks, which is why this book and why now?
Well, thanks, Emily. And I'll answer the question, but I have to say how thrilled I am to be able to participate in this because it is the Institute for Humane Studies. As you say, I'm an IHS alum. I've been with IHS now for 21 years, which is hard to say out loud, but it's pretty exciting for me. And so congratulations on your 60th. It's amazing. I remember having a great party for the 40th, and hopefully we'll be all be in a position to celebrate together sometime soon, but it's a big deal. And I also have to say I'm awfully intimidated by the group that's on the line right now, because I am conscious that the ideas that are in this book have been shamefully cribbed from a lot of the work that you all have done. And so I expect you'll let me know how well you think Charles and I have done at representing a lot of the ideas that you guys have been working on for your careers. Why did we write the book? Why now? Well, we've been working on this book for the past 5 years. And so we didn't intend to release it in a period of such extreme disruption and such uncertainty. But I do think that it is particularly relevant to what's going on in the country right now. So, we wrote this book to be a guide for people who are looking around at society and thinking, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be more that we can do to realize the ideals of human flourishing, human progress, the ideals that have inspired our country and I think inspire, classical liberal scholarship. And there's 3 core ideas that are at really kind of at the heart of this book. The first is that while we recognize the problems in our country are many and varied, and so they will require a lot of different tailored solutions, all of the solutions are going to have in common at their core this deep belief in people, this idea that every person has the potential to make a contribution based on his or her gift. And as a society, if we are organized in a way that helps them to discover and express that gift in a way that benefits themselves by benefiting others, that's how we're going to make progress. And I think that resonates hopefully very well with the mission of the IHS and the work of a lot of the folks on the call today. The second big idea that we put forward is this notion that solutions that empower people from the bottom up, that are based in local knowledge and a practical experience, rather than sort of dictate one-size-fits-all approaches from the top down, just tend to work better. And we try to share stories that illustrate that contrast and ultimately, hopefully, again, provide that guide for people who are looking around for a better way. And then the third big idea is that those who look for common ground tend to find it. And when we focus not on our differences, but on those issues that we have in common with people, and especially people who have different perspectives or are different than we are, we just can get a whole lot more done. And we think that through telling the stories of people throughout history, as well as some folks who are applying those ideas right now, we can help others who are searching for how they can contribute to help, address some of the big challenges in our country, and ultimately for us to make progress towards our North Star of realizing more fully the principles that motivate our country, the principles that have driven progress throughout history.
So let me dive into the, I want to get to the big broad themes that you just described. But first, let me ask you about the alarm that you and Charles sound, which is that we are sprinting towards a two-tiered society. Can you unpack that a bit? And then, I want to ask you the question, why are we seeing this? Why are we sprinting towards a two-tiered society?
Well, again, I want to be modest in my answer to that question. I think there's a lot of difficult challenge or questions that are balled up in that idea. But what we express in the book is, on the one hand, there's never been a better time to be alive. And we want to always be very forthright that progress is real right now, and progress is benefiting the majority of people in our country. If Don Boudreau were on this call, he wouldn't let me get away without really emphasizing that. It's a really important point. But that progress is very unequally distributed, which is not on its own a bad thing. But when we look at the reasons why it is, that starts to cause some pretty big concern. And so what we identify as the challenge ahead is, or the cause of that two-tiered society, is this idea that the institutions that we rely on in society to empower people to realize their potential aren't working very well for a lot of people. And we talk about the institutions as education. These are the things that people sort of rely on to succeed. Education, strong communities, the role that business can play in helping people to realize their potential, as well as sound government policy, public policy. And so we try to go through a reasonable analysis of each one of those institutions in the book to try to identify what are the barriers that are created in those institutions that are holding people back rather than empowering them. And then we have a discussion of the consequences of those barriers, which, in many cases are very, very stark. This decline in life expectancy that Angus Deaton identified and describes as deaths of despair, for instance. Some of these things are just indicators of big problems in our country that you can't ignore when you look at them.
So can you talk about, give me an example of one of the barriers that you see that's within our grasp to reverse, to break down, so that everybody can flourish? What would be one of the top barriers that, if you could break it down and you see a pathway to breaking it down, that you'd want to lay out for people?
Well, I'll just dive right into the lion's den, given that I'm on the phone with a call with a bunch of educators. I'll say education. The barriers in our system of education right now are amongst the most important, at least as I see it, and as reflected in the work that we do at Stand Together and the Charles Koch Foundation. And the framework that we use to understand those barriers is this idea that, to the extent that education is one size fits all, sort of being imposed from the top down on students, rather than being tailored to the individual students to really help them to discover their gifts, develop the skills that they need to develop those gifts, and then ultimately provide practical opportunities for them to apply those gifts in a way that benefits themselves by benefiting others. To the extent that they're not getting that opportunity, that students aren't getting that opportunity, we shouldn't be surprised that they're not doing those things, right? That they're not actually being able to realize their potential. And while there's many great examples of education that goes through those three dimensions, and a lot of people that I'm looking at are pioneers of this, unfortunately, for most students in our country, they are not receiving that kind of an education. They're receiving what we describe in the book and others have called one-dimensional schooling, as opposed to education. And so some of the indicators, it's always dangerous when you look at some of these macro indicators of the state of our education system. The one that I find, maybe one of the that I find really useful, it's not test scores and all of that, although those are abysmal. It's when you poll fifth graders and you ask them, how engaged are you in your education? And I'm sure that's not the language that they use, but that's ultimately what they're trying to get at. The number is something like 70%. 70% say, yeah, I'm digging it, right?
I love school.
Get me engaged. Yeah, I love school. When you poll 12th graders, it's about 30%. Now, even when you allow for sort of the to be expected, teenager malaise, that's not okay. That's not acceptable if you believe the purpose of education is ultimately to help people to discover and apply their gifts. If you believe education has other purposes, maybe you're not so concerned about that. But if you're not engaged, how in the world are you expected to go through this discovery process and ultimately find your opportunity to contribute in the world? And so you ask what's in our grasp. I think that's absolutely within our grasp. Yeah. Because there are so many examples of a better way, we just have to turn a whole lot more people onto those examples and in those opportunities.
And that brings me to a broader point that I'd like to make, because one of the things that I love about the book is that you and Charles talk a lot about the benefits of liberalism, that there's just this just an embarrassment of gifts of liberalism, from the Great Enrichment, the principles of the Declaration of Independence, the vibrancy that comes from a spirit of creative destruction that is part of the liberal project. But you also acknowledge that the liberal project was highly imperfect at the start, and it continues to evolve. It is anything but a completed project. So what would you say to those who are ready to give up on the liberal project out of frustration for its continued imperfections?
Well, don't. That's my headline. Don't do that. Don't give up. No, I would say a few things. I do think that the work that the Institute for Humane Studies does, the work that each of the people that I can see right now on this call as scholars and educators do, it's the most important thing that we can do to continue to make progress as a country. And I know it's a bold claim. I'm happy to back it up if you want to challenge me on that. But what we talk about in the book, and here's part of why I say that. What we talk about in the book is that, the North Star for our country, or the ideals of classical liberalism, offer us a goal to strive for. And by no means has our country ever lived up to those ideas. The case that we try to make in this book is that the history of progress in our country has been a continual struggle to do better, as measured by those ideals. And motivating people to see injustices and then to mobilize to address those injustices is how we're going to continue to make progress. And we're never going to be done, right? We're never going to be perfect. I think Pete Boettke used to tell me, to say that we're ideal is to say that we're hopeless, right? And we've all got a lot of hope. We can always do better. And so the struggle for liberalism, I think right now is more important certainly than it's ever been in my lifetime. And that's for a couple of reasons, right? One is you've got a whole lot of people who are looking around and saying, I'm not going to settle for the current situation. So they're open to new ideas in a way that they haven't been before. That doesn't by any stretch mean that that the liberal ideas are the ones that are going to inspire them. There's a competition right now, right? There's a lot of bad alternatives that are being offered as well. But given that people are looking for a better way, if we don't offer them that better way, if we don't show them that, hey, these ideas actually make a difference in helping people to live better lives, we're never going to have a shot in that contest.
Let me put this challenge to you, though, that I'm a champion of creative destruction as well, but this is one of the themes that you and Charles really bring to life about the power of creative destruction in the book, and and I'm singing with the choir on that one. But at the same time, there's a challenge there, because it could mean that the creative destruction that is part of the liberal project, that because of the openness, you have also this openness to radical change. The dynamism is absolutely a good thing, but at the same time, it is the source of dislocation. It's the source of an ungroundedness. It's the source of uncertainty and anxiety. And I think that that's part of the critique of liberalism, is that its very internal forces are a source of illiberalism, this desire to shut down, this desire to draw inward, to become more closed, to become more xenophobic. And so is there something to that critique, that to use a sort of Marxian phrase, is there a seed of its own destruction within liberalism by being so open to dynamism? Does it create its own destruction in this way?
Well, I think absolutely that's the concern, right? Creative destruction requires an emphasis on the creative, not just on the destruction.
Nicely put. I like that. I'm stealing that, by the way.
But and so what does that actually look like in practice? And I think that the project of liberalism really will benefit from sort of widening the aperture of the work that's being done and the object of the study. And this is maybe more the case in the popularization of liberalism, because I know that the scholars are doing a lot of work to really recognize that liberalism is not just about government policy, or it's not just about this slice of life, but it really is a holistic view of how we can all live well together. But I think that, at least in the application of this notion of liberalism, we've gotten a lot of the emphasis a little bit out of whack. And so if we emphasize one aspect of it without emphasizing another aspect of it, we shouldn't expect it to work the way that the ideas say that it does. And so what does that mean in practice? What we try to put forward in this book is this vision of these four key institutions of society: education, strong communities, a vibrant and principled business sector, as well as government policy. If they're all firing on all cylinders, then they complement each other, and they work well to give people the tools that they need to be empowered and to be able to overcome the challenges that come with the destruction side of creative destruction. But
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Please go ahead.
Well, I think this builds on what you were just saying, is that gets to the subtitle of the book, which I love, bottom up solutions for a top down world. I think that's where your comment was heading, at least I hope, is, why are bottom up solutions, better suited to complex social problems? Because I think that unpacking that is helpful, because unless you're steeped in Tocqueville and Ostrom and Hayek, et cetera, it's not obvious that it would seem like the more complex the social problem, the more we would want to have a kind of command and control, sort of top-down solution, an engineered solution. So I think it's helpful for us to unpack and think through the rationale for the bottom up, because it's one of those things that feels natural once you are coming from a Tocquevillian or Ostrom perspective. But we have to remind ourselves to go back and rethink it and re-articulate it. So and you're on a book tour now. You must be receiving lots of challenge along these lines. So how are you articulating the case for the bottom up?
Well, I think that we can talk about the theoretical justification. We can talk about the idea of the fatal conceit, or what Bill Easterly's work has done to talk about the tyranny of experts, that sort of thing. But I think the most persuasive case for bottom-up solutions is that they just work better. And so what we try to do in the book is tell stories about that, and then kind of extrapolate some lessons. But it's the notion that when you invest in people who are closest to the problems, they tend to have the kind of knowledge, the practical knowledge, to figure out how best to overcome those problems in a way that somebody from afar isn't. And so, we tell the story, for instance, of the Family Independence Initiative, which is a small group out of Oakland, California. They've been at helping families emerge from poverty for about 20 years, founded by a guy named Mauricio Miller, and now run by a guy named Jesus Herrera, both of whom grew up in poverty. And so they were witness and experienced the sort of specific decisions that people who are in that situation have to make every day. And so when it comes time for them to help other families, their approach just works better, right? And what does that mean? It means that on average, a family that works with the Family Independence Initiative for 2 years, their income increases 27% on average. And importantly, it stays up. That's enough to get them above the poverty line and to continue on that trajectory. Their savings increase, 200%. And when you compare that, say, to a top-down approach, just take the war on poverty, for instance, those are extraordinary results relative to that baseline, with a heck of a lot fewer resources, right? Family Independence Initiative on average provides about $3,500 over 2 years to families. It's not a lot of money. It's enough to help them solve some problems. But what do? They put families, cohorts of families together, cohorts of families who are in poverty together, under the idea that families who are in poverty know best how to get themselves out of poverty, but they just need some help. They need financial capital, modest financial capital, and they need social capital. They need the benefit of sort of the communal support that we all benefit from in order to help support the decisions that we can make to improve the lives for our families. And there's literally, I mean, I love my job because I get to meet literally hundreds of people, every year that have similar stories in their own domain. We tell a similar story about a group called the Phoenix, which is an addiction recovery program based on physical fitness, peer-to-peer relationships that support physical fitness. The Phoenix was founded by somebody who struggled with addiction for 10 years, Scott Strode. So of course it works better than the best clinical programs. The results are twice as good as the best clinical programs because Scott knows what it means to struggle with addiction. And he's been able to leverage that personal knowledge to empower others to go overcome a problem that it's hard to do if you don't know about it from a personal perspective.
And what I love about those two examples is they show two things that I think are non-obvious, but people get as soon as you name them, right? One is the power of local knowledge, the importance of local knowledge driving a solution, that it's out of those examples that you get that's what bottom up means. It's not bottom up is better just because it's bottom up. It's because it's drawing from local knowledge, boots on the ground knowledge. And so that's the first piece. The other piece is that it's inherently hopeful about the capacity that is embedded within communities. The capacity, and even a community that is poor or coming out of a struggle with addiction, that there is capacity within those communities. And that so what a social entrepreneur can do is to find ways to tap that capacity. The social entrepreneur isn't trying to do for a group of people who otherwise are helpless. No, it's about finding a way to tap that capacity and that agency, not only within individuals, but also within individuals in a context where they've got lots and lots of robust social capital. Is that how you describe have I got the social entrepreneurship paradigm right that you and Charles are articulating? What am I missing there?
Well, no, I think you've got it very much right in the context of the examples that I gave, in the context of how do you leverage the resources that are within communities, for sure. We try to put forward a broader definition of social entrepreneurship, which is to say that a social entrepreneur is someone who looks at the barriers that are holding people back, and unlike most folks who can only look at the problem, the social entrepreneur looks at those barriers and they also can see the solution. Right, so they're discovering new and better ways to serve people, to help people to overcome those barriers, and then they're able to, as an entrepreneur does, bring the resources and bring the social capital to those solutions to actually make them go.
So you, and this is my last question before we close out. You talk about bottom-up solutions. You talk about the power of social entrepreneurship and the approach of partnering with anyone to do right and no one to do wrong, the Frederick Douglass paradigm. And these examples that you've given us are really help me to ground that. What does that look like? What does this approach look like within the academy? Because on the one hand, the reason why we're talking to scholars today is because as you said right at the beginning, they're driving the ideas that are helping you and your colleagues that stand together advance a more robust solution to social change than we've seen in the past. And so the ideas themselves are important. But thinking about the academy as part of the foundational institutions of a free and open society, how can we deploy these principles of bottom-up solutions, partnering with anyone to do right, social entrepreneurship in the context of a healthy academy?
Well, again, I want to answer that with the appropriate level of intellectual humility. You guys know your business better than I do, for sure. But this notion of uniting with anyone to do right is an inspirational quote by Frederick Douglass that explains, to me at least, the success of movements that have helped move our country closer towards our North Star. But it has a lot of reinforcing insights to it. And the one probably most relevant that we draw from, to your question, is from Michael Polanyi, this notion of a republic of science and how best to move knowledge forward. And so, that's he sort of describes the application of that insight within the academy, to the extent that you guys are inviting people who come from different perspectives, different disciplines, different methods, even within your own discipline, to the table to to bring these different approaches to bear on similar problems. A lot of you are already doing that, right? But that I think feels like a much more productive approach than sort of the very sort of myopic, one way to address a question. But when it comes to education, again, an issue that's very important to the work that we do, I think also creating the environment for students to encounter new and different ideas, that discovery process of education, that first step in that 3-step process I described a minute ago, is one that we often sort of give short shrift to. When you get to college, you're encouraged to sort of name your major, that sort of thing, or in K through 12, most of the time, we never even give students a chance to do that. But taking some time to really kind of soak in on different approaches, different ideas, different focus areas, that sort of thing, so that students can discover where they have a gift and what they're passionate about, I think is really important and is often underemphasized in education right now. But again, I think I'm preaching to the choir on this one. This is what IHS is all about to me.
Yeah, and what I love about that explanation, or that last riff, is that you don't shy away from passion, right? That in higher education, obviously we privilege critical reason, and there's an appropriate place to use the word dispassionate inquiry, right? That, in other words, I want to take my own priors. I want to be able to. That's what critical reason looks like, is to be able to put my priors aside so I can examine my assumptions. I can interrogate my own way of thinking and others' ways of thinking, so that we lead towards truth. But that doesn't really set aside passion. And Polanyi was so great at this, right? That in the Republic of Science and the Study of Man, he makes a case for scholarly passion, that you have to connect, you have to believe that your ideas matter in the world. Otherwise, why go through the, all that is required for critical, rigorous investigation and intellectual inquiry if you don't have a passion for it? And so that appropriate embrace of passion in it coupled with critical reason is, I think, part of what it looks like to engage in a genuine discovery process intellectually. And the other part of the passion piece is that it's fun. And one of the things that I've made sure that we do at IHS is we set aside warlike analogies when we talk about the academic enterprise. Like, I don't even like the language of the battle of ideas, because it's not a battle. This is the most fun thing that we could possibly be doing. And so, and that's a spirit in which I think you bring to the book and bring to your work.
I know we're close to time, Emily. I think the point you're making is so right. Let me just share an insight that I came upon a couple of years ago, which supports this notion that we can't take the human element out of the search for knowledge, right? There's nothing wrong with being passionate about understanding the implications of the ideas that you guys are working on. And there's secondary and third benefits to actually bringing that human element, that passion into the exploration of ideas. You know, I've always been a big fan of John Tomasi and the work that he does through his Janus Forum. And I've always, you know, for many years, I thought of that work as a great way to bring people with different perspectives, you know, eminent scholars together, and to sort of showcase what it means to disagree without being disagreeable, to, you know, and to present different perspectives to an audience. What I totally missed until a couple of years ago was, while as valuable as that is, and it is super valuable, the actual enterprise, the way that John's organized his students in creating that forum is so valuable on its own, right? Because you get a bunch of students who are passionate. They come from different perspectives, right? Anybody, I think his standard, at least it's been in the past, anybody who's a member of a student organization on Brown can participate. And then John sort of sets up the rules of engagement, but these students have to figure out, how are we going to work together? How are we actually going to collaborate on an enterprise that we're passionate about, even though we have very different perspectives? And what they wind up doing is putting on a great program, the Janus Forum, but the personal growth and the secondary benefits of that for the students, I have to imagine is one of the best parts of the experience, and one of the greatest pieces of value that John creates through that program. And that if we just said, well, look, you know, this is a sterile exercise of, you know, of scientific discovery, you're going to miss the recognition of that. You might give short shrift to the environment and the investment that he makes in actually fostering that.
I can't think of a better note to end on. Thank you, Brian, for joining us today. Best of luck with the book tour. We're so excited about your work. Thank you for all the ways that you support personally this community of scholars, and the intellectual fun of the engagements that we get to have, in part because of the work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. I really appreciate it.